Welcome, Ulrika.
Thank you. Thank you, Shilpa. How are you?
Good. I'm so excited to talk to you. It's been in the works. So today's topic is heart-centered awareness, and I felt like your work and your alignment is so perfect with this that I wanted to have a conversation with you. And maybe you can start off by just sharing a little bit of background so that our guests are aware of your connection to this topic.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I'm honored to be on your show. And just a few sentences about myself. I'm an intuitive spiritual life coach and a galactic astrologer. I work holistically with others over long periods of time, sometimes. And really, the essence of my work is to help others really tune into the truth of themselves. I call it the true self. There's many, labels on what we want to call that, but ultimately, it's to help others align to who they are ultimately, deep down. And I am a guide. I am a coach. I'm a spiritual teacher, and in a way, it's about that awakening and awareness that we were talking about, the awakening of awareness of the heart and that energy instead of and why am I talking about that? Because what qualifies me is really I once spent over like 20 years, let's say, in a very traditional path as a career woman, very multitasking environment, and I basically was up in my mind, in my head all the time. And but what happened was that, and the result of that was I was so disconnected from myself, not knowing, not being aware that that was actually what was happening. But the symptoms were I was exhausted. I was not really in connection with myself. And why would I, even question that? But what happened was that I had an awakening, basically, and often it happens as a rock bottom for many. And in my case, it happened through my work, which was very much of importance to me at that time. I basically was very much identified with my career, and it might look different for others in terms of how we hang our hat up on an external structure or expectations, or call it what you will, that are not really associated with who we truly are.
And
So yeah, that's just a few sentences of why I'm here talking about heart awareness and heart-centered awareness.
sounds like you walked the walk and you've been through the journey of arriving at a place where there was no doubt that you had to go back within and reconnect. I truly believe most of the women on this podcast that listen are professional women who either are still working in that space or ready to make that transition because they felt that what I call the wobble, the disconnect
Yeah,
from the inner self.
yeah. Yeah, and it's so important to acknowledge that it's we're all part of our own journey, right? And once we start to feel that wobble, and the wobble can also be like there's got to have to be something more. There's got to have to be something more to me, and my experience here, and that's really the wobble when we start to ask ourselves those questions, because for the longest time we may not ask ourselves questions at all, as far as who am I, or can I have what I truly want. We just follow some sort of template of what success is, or how we are supposed to fulfill our life. And that, I think, is really the breakthrough, when we start to ask ourselves questions and kind of be curious about that.
And you mentioned earlier something that I too could resonate with because I spent a majority of my career getting higher and higher education, but also working in corporate, very technology space. And ultimately, my two or three things started to occur. One is that I trusted my intuition less and less, gave it less and less credibility. I trusted my feminine energy even less, and almost looked down upon things that felt weak, like, oh, I mean, this is sometimes controversial, but if you're having your period, those are cycles of the female, but often that's also something where you want to feel shame and hide it. And the third one also I felt was being so disconnected from my heart. I was so locked in my head.
Absolutely. And all of what you describe now is has been in a way not appreciated, or not kind of ways of living that are considered by society as successful, if you will, or should be considered. Because many of us have really suppressed those cycles or ways of gaining information, because intuition is something that everyone has, right? And like you, it was like, nah, even if I feel something that is true, I'm going to go over here because that's what is said to me is successful or way to do things. So yeah, I think it's time now to bring back, I think a lot of the feminine is going to be, there's a rise of that feminine energy for sure, not just as a thought, but actually as a natural, and also in looking at astrological energies, that there's definitely a shift here coming, and we're in a shift that is really natural to the cycles of the earth and of the universe. So there's no there's no going back, right? So I think we're right on time here talking about these things, because if anyone is watching or listening to this that have the same kind of, okay, it's time, there's something more here within you that needs to come out and be expressed. If you're listening and watching this, that's what it is. Yeah, so you're right on time.
And with the word expression itself, now that I've really become immersed in this world, like where you and I spend our, I would say, intellectual time and heart time, is that expression is a feeling. And often when you are disconnected the ways I described, I feel like we disregard also the information we receive through these feelings, and the feeling from the heart, and that strength of the heart. It can resonate miles away. Others can feel it. And unless it's scientifically hooked up, I would have not believed it in the past. But there is energy in just the heart and the intelligence. Maybe you can speak to some of that, how it plays out in your work.
Yes, absolutely. And as I mentioned earlier, I help others navigate this, going from the mental domain to the heart domain, and actually shift the way they consider themselves, but also how it expresses itself in their life, because it's a shift. And the heart energy itself is really linked into our intuition and the rest of the universe, our life force. While the mind, the mental domain, is very much of polarity, if you will. And often we find ourselves in, like, is it this or is it that? Is it right or is it wrong, right? That's the typical mental domain of activity. And there's a lot of scenarios and what ifs, right, in that domain. Once we come down and connect to our heart energy, it just is. And that's the biggest shift that people make when they start to trust that what just is within their life, because that takes often, a person down the right path for them that their soul has, want to walk, and start to acknowledge the talents and the gifts that we have, each individual has naturally, and start to appreciate that, and not kind of say, okay, I have to have all these degrees to be valued. as an example, right? Maybe it's some other talent or expression of an individual that actually is their natural gift. And I've seen so many just absolutely flourish in their own, natural talents once they start to acknowledge what they really are here for.
That is so lovely the way you articulated that, because again, coming from that space where I was and trying to always be more, be enough, whether it's for the cultural background I came with their own expectations of a woman, or then having worked in technology where there was this constant need to prove myself. And as you further engage in the spiritual or mindfulness space, you recognize that agnostic to all of that external stuff, you are so much more than that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the strength of the heart that you were mentioning earlier. Once we can align with that and see ourselves in that light, that's when I'm whole. I'm one with my environment and my path. And it's like, what else is there now? It's just is.
And for those who may not quite be there, perhaps those souls that are maybe where you and I might have been 15 years ago or longer, what what indicators are there that your soul or your intuition is trying to nudge you or talk to you?
Mm, yeah. And here is where it's very difficult sometimes to say it's this. You have to look for this, because for each individual, it's something different. And often, the way I kind of express this is often it is where it matters the most to you. And just to give you an example, for me, as I mentioned earlier, I was very, very, I was married to my career in the past. Right? It mattered to me. It mattered a lot to me, right? And often in those areas where it matters the most is where things are getting shaken up, or it, because it is really to wake us up. It really is to throw us out in the unknown. So these indicators can be different for each individual, but often it is something that we at the time is valuing a lot. That's all I'm saying about that, because it can be anything really that in the external world that creates this wobble or this opportunity to make it a choice to pivot.
Yeah, and absolutely, that I can relate to. I think my story may be aligned with yours. Others might be different. Maybe their goals were different and they were in a different space. For me, I was so saturated in my desire to make my career the end all be all. I couldn't see further than that. That was my identity. That was my goal. And it felt so comfortable just doing that for countless years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a similar story there. And I think the indicator that our intuition is kind of poking us, you asked that question as well. What is it that what is it that makes us listen all of a sudden? Often it comes with physical symptoms as well. And I mentioned earlier, maybe let's say you're at work or in situations, a big gathering, family gathering or something, and you come home completely exhausted. That is a signal that there is something here that is imbalanced, if you will. Exhaustion often is that physical symptom of imbalance. So notice, if you're listening or watching, notice kind of in what area of your life is it where you feel depleted, or and what that means is that you may work against this natural energy that wants to flow through you, and you're giving your energy away, and often it comes as an indicator of a change that needs to happen.
Mhm.
Because I definitely in the past did not believe that I could be successful without striving or struggling. It went together, right? But now, being where I'm at, is that there is no struggle anymore in my life. It's and just changing that belief that we have to struggle and we have to exhaust ourselves to get where we want to. It's a huge shift. Because now, like after a conversation like this or in a coaching session with someone, I feel energized. It's like, woohoo, right? And that's what we can have in every single thing we do or in our lives. And that's a big shift. So I think when your intuition tells you, hey, there is something here that needs to be different. And because it's an energy of your, or that you feel is kind of heavy in one area of your life, that's an indicator.
Yes, and the balance is something that's used a lot in our generation. I feel like there's an opportunity though among those who are using that word to really hone in on what they mean by balance. It's not I put in 7 hours at work, but I'll give 2 hours on the weekend. And then
Yeah.
it's more about your intention. And once you've set your intention, like for me, could be as simple as I want to be more present with my loved ones. And that's the intention for the work. And so that way, when the energy is put into anything, you are then truly creating balance.
Absolutely. Yes. And going back to the heart-centered awareness there, balance is something also that comes from within. Nobody else can tell you what your balance in a certain area of life is. And I think that's the inner contemplation that we need to get to say, okay, what is it that maybe I need to do less of or spend more time on to feel whole? Because balance and wholeness is also, very closely linked. And all of that is discerned through the heart. Because if we were to allow our mind to make those decisions, it would never be enough. It would always be, okay, we can do a little bit more, and what if, and all of that, right? So the awareness of the heart and tapping into that comes with allowing ourselves to really feel what matters to us, but also what we need, and asking ourselves that question, what do I need?
And given the history of what you and I just talked about, the alignment of our past, one of the things that I've learned over the course of meeting all these spiritual mindfulness coaches last couple of years is that the mind is thinks it's in charge. While back in the days, especially, we would have been like, oh no, it's the mind that I rely on. But when you drop in and truly drop in, and I don't know if I'm there yet, it's a daily practice, but truly drop into the heart, that becomes the driver. And the mind, you can assign a task later. I think of it as a secondary task, because that's the one, like you were saying, if then left, right, yes, no, and give that to the mind, because we're used
Absolutely.
to historically running away from predators that could hurt us. But in this modern day generation, our ultimate goal is really to stay aligned with our higher self.
Yes. Yeah. And one other thing that I feel in heart-centered awareness is so beautiful is that once we tap into our heart energy and our life force, we also have access to a much bigger perspective of ourselves. We have connection, direct line to the universe as well. And I think that's part of where we are as humanity now. We're ready to have a perspective of ourselves as a bigger than just kind of I'm in a soul in a body, right? Or a body with a soul. Um, there is something so vast about us that we are now ready, I feel, to start to relate to and actually work with, because many of us are just, even if we're in the physical world, seem successful or balanced, there is so much more to ourselves that we are limiting ourselves. I think that's my point. So this heart awareness also allows for an expansion in consciousness, and I think we're there. We're many of us are ready for that perspective, and that's um, that's also bringing us into more connection with each other and our environment.
And you and I were just moments before we hit record talking about co-creation. And ultimately, creation for me, when I think of it truly, because I just love creating, it makes my heart smile. It makes me feel it's coming from the heart. And there's no ego there, or ideally, there's no ego there. There's just this pure life force energy. And when you co-create with other people, there's like this two melding of souls saying, hey, let's be creative together and tapping into that higher source.
Absolutely. Yes. And that's when we become, powerful, in the sense that that strength of heart that you mentioned in the beginning, that's when we don't have to doubt ourselves anymore, or put ourselves down, or all the habits and patterns that we may have been conditioned consciously or unconsciously, as far as how we place ourselves here. We don't have to engage in that anymore, and that's part of what feels like freedom sometimes.
It does feel like freedom, and does feel like those you had mentioned or articulated that there was this catalyst, perhaps I forget the word you used, that led to down to the pivot. I too had gone through that, and that catalyst was not pleasant. There were series
Right.
of pleasant, I would say, either subtle or larger things that occurred, and ultimately it brought pain to the heart. But it was the pain that I was trying to recover from that allowed me to then grow. And I feel like a lot of us are, I mean, I feel like we have a gift at this point, and there are other people who don't have to suffer as much. They're receptive, they can go down the path without the pain.
Yeah. Yeah. And that path is obviously different for each of us. And it's, for some, it doesn't have to involve suffering.
Yes.
Discovered that too. And for some it is, but it's very individual what it takes, because part of what I've also discovered, and every time somebody comes to me, it's divinely guided, because I know that they have decided, their soul have decided that it's time now. And the way it often expresses itself is that there's such a willingness to start kind of asking themselves questions and do the work. Because if there's any doubt that this is the next step in their soul's journey, they would never go outside their comfort zone. But when somebody is willing to go outside their comfort zone and into the unknown to some extent, whether that is through a rock bottom or not, that's kind of the green light, right? and yeah.
And ultimately, like you've mentioned, the path may be different for different people, but it the desire to take that journey
Mhm.
really has to come from within.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And
And
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was just going to agree with you again, that it's about the willingness. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, again, just like there's different paths, perhaps you can speak to the different modalities one can apply or use to awaken heart-centered awareness.
Mm. Well, again, it comes with, well, there are different ways, but a firm believer of that there has to be some sort of inner focus. So, and we're so trained in having the external focus, if you will. So once we are starting to get willing and interested in turning the focus to some extent inwards,
Yes.
it creates a desire to go there again. And I'm not so hung up on how that happens. Many people are drawn to meditation, and I'm but for some it's just not the thing, and that's okay. But it's that inner focus, inner conversation, if you will, inner truth. I call it sometimes inner transparency that we need to get to, where we can be completely hearing and listening what our truth is. And if that happens through meditation, if that happens through walking in the woods or hugging a tree, like, yeah, but it's an inner journey, if you will, that and often it creates a spiritual practice of some sort that we just want to come back to every day, and it becomes part of our lifestyle. At least that's how it developed for me. And for some, it's about also involving the body in that conversation and tuning into our own energy, and how we can, be allowing ourselves to step out of the mind, basically, and into our heart and body, and allowing that to speak to us.
And we were
Um,
talking about my different pillars for my business, and one of them is energy awareness. And I believe that the heart itself has tremendous energy, and there are different ways
yeah.
to invoke that energy. It could be like singing, and
Hmm.
the
Yep.
words could invoke different vibrations that creates some movement through the heart, or breath work.
Yeah.
That those modalities like meditation, which for me, just like you were describing, it's a must have. It's who I have become. And I think at some point I must have always been that, but I just needed to rediscover that person.
Yes, I love that you are saying rediscovering, because that's really what it is. It really is a rediscovery of what's natural to us, to live in harmony and balance with ourselves and our body and our environment.
Mhm.
And many people sometimes ask me, like, Ulrika, can you give me your secret or can you give me the way to do it? And I say, no, but I can help you navigate to your own solution. I can help you navigate what's right for you. And that's also part of what sometimes people get hung up on, that we are so conditioned to wanting that quick solution, and taking somebody else's solution that have had success and
Yeah.
apply it to ourselves. But that's kind of never going to work, really, because that what works for one person is may not be the right for you. Or so it's that journey we have to be willing to take to discover what is, for example, my spiritual practice that works for me, that I want to come back to every day. And there's where we have to kind of work with um, departing from the external expectation or how it should be.
Yeah.
And
And
that's part of the journey as well, to kind of detach from that.
and that's probably one of the things that you and I experienced when we were so, I would, for lack of a better word, attached to our past careers as our identity, is that there was a lot of external expectations on what it should look like, how we should behave and arrive. And when I departed from that space to become a coach last 2 or 3 years, I realized there are no rules really. I mean, there's some fundamental guidelines that I see as best practice that you can apply, but ultimately you can have or shape your own coaching the way you want to.
Yeah, and it's that self-discovery. That's exactly what self-discovery is on. And it's coming from within. It's that willingness, that curiosity that is the driver of it. That if we're not curious about our inner journey, it's not going to happen, basically. And that's okay. It's okay. Not everyone is here to walk the inner journey, and that's fine too. But for those who are likely here on this podcast and listening to this. So yeah.
So you mentioned modalities. We both agree that perhaps different modalities work for different people. Although my personal take is that to really quiet the mind, which is the goal, to go inwards, meditation is a very powerful tool. However, there are different ways. Maybe you can share maybe 3 tips to our audience of the top 3 things that have worked for you.
Hmm. Yeah. And at the top of my list is meditation. That's how I got introduced to, any form of inner inquiry, as early as 13 years old. So that's a long practice for me. But meditation for me is also an opportunity to really listen, because one of the myths about meditation from my perspective is that it has to be like completely quiet. No, it's not the purpose, because that's where people are struggling and leave it often, because they think that it has to be like nothing going on. But what is the difference is that when we start to hear our truth instead of all the what ifs of the mind, that's the difference. And our meditation time can become almost like I have developed it into channeling. So I have conversations with my guides. I use, so that's the second tip. Use I use intuitive automatic writing, because I download from my channeling to write. Some people speak, but I prefer to write. I'm a writer. And that's how I tune into my own truth, so to say, and downloads from my guides and things that and it comes through the heart. So if we want to develop this inner conversation, it's about meditation. And often guided meditations are really beautiful for someone who hasn't experienced meditation before, because what that does, a guided meditation allows you to rest, to sit back and just follow. And that's exactly what how we can rest the mind, right? We don't have to be in the action mode. And in the beginning, it really helpful with the guided meditation, because then we can just, energetically sit back and relax and follow. But there are many ways of and modalities of meditation. So I'm just sharing what works for me. And then that intuitive journaling, I call it, where we kind of not have an intention really, but really write down everything that comes through us without editing, without any judgment. And that's a way to get to know our true self, by reading it afterwards and saying, I actually learned something, or I got a piece of advice here that would never been coming through the mental domain. So that's pretty powerful. And it can be a practice, a 5-minute practice a day to start, and it can expand from there. I also include breath work and yoga in my spiritual practice. And the reason for that, and many of us do, who kind of have an interest in integrating body, mind, feeling whole in a way, but it's also to get to know our body, because way many years ago, I was completely disconnected from my body. I thought I treated my body as a someone that was going to go to work and go to grocery store and do all these things for me, right? but but what I didn't treat it as is as a vessel for communication. And so that's what yoga helped me with, connecting that inner language of my body as well. So I mean, I'm describing tools here that many are familiar with. But what really creates the power in this is that, to come back to it over and over and over again. And not just use a spiritual practice when we feel we need it. It's something that actually is part of life.
Absolutely. It's what I call my non-negotiables. Fortunately
Yes.
for me, I'm married to a man who seems, from the beginning of our marriage, it was like, that's whatever she needs to do, she does it. And my son now just watches me meditate, and
Mhm.
um, it's so natural to him that I feel good, because ultimately, should he need to start really integrating that into his life, it won't feel odd, it won't feel weird.
Right. Yeah. No, I love it. And you bring up a great point also, because sometimes it holds us back because the rest of our family is not into it, if you will, and it can just like, nah, I wait another week. I'm not going to start this week. No, nobody else is doing it, right? But it's, especially with children, like they really observe. And what you say is like it might not feel at all weird for him when he's a little older and say, okay, what can I do to, and he's watched you over the years, like, yeah, why not? Right. So often our family is following kind of what we're doing. So, and it's often the mistake that is made to kind of, oh, shouldn't you start to meditate? Oh, it would help you so much. But no, right. When somebody comes and asks you about it, that's the green flag to actually start sharing about it, and not until then.
Absolutely. Well, all of the things that you listed, I again resonate with the meditation and the approach that you use to tap into your intuition. For me, it's been interesting. The second part of the journaling, it's only been something I've become more comfortable with in the last few years, even though I know it's good for me. And I've on again, off again through my youth and my adulthood tried it. But it wasn't until I actually took a step back recently and said, I'm done trying to get to the next place. I'm here where I'm here, and I'm going to nurture myself by doing these downloads.
Yeah,
Feels nurturing.
it does. Yes. And it's a practice of being very present,
Yes.
because it's the moment that this is happening, and you can only catch those messages in the moment.
Mhm.
So you can't think ahead, you can't be in the past, you're just here. And it's it's really what it is, to relax on the inside of you, to allow whatever comes through come through in the moment. So yeah, beautiful. It's such a and it takes all we need to do is to be open to it, open to try,
Yeah.
and you'll be surprised what come through. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I could do a whole just a journal on the journaling aspect alone with
Hmm.
you. It might have to
Yes.
be a future podcast, because there's been so many layers of unraveling and truth for me and healing that's occurred through that process. So yeah, I think I'll earmark this as a topic for you and I in the near future.
Absolutely, I'm happy to come back.
Well, I know my guests love to read up on those who are talking about specific topics. As I mentioned, heart-centered awareness, which you've shared so much. Is there anything else you'd like to share about the topic, as well as how people can find you, which I'll include in the show notes as well?
Yes. Yes. And if you're listening or watching this and feel kind of, okay, I want to know more about how to actually engage my or drop into my heart space, I want to invite you to my website, ulrikasullivan.com. And also there you will find, I wrote a book about this. The book is called Wisdom Beyond What You Know. And basically it is about how to shift from being driven by the mind to living from the heart and intuition. And it really is I call it an actionable spiritual self-help book, because part of it is also in each chapter, there are actionable exercises and practices that you can engage in and actually get results for yourself. And so it's not some sort of idea, right? Often, because that's exactly why I included coaching exercises in the book, because often it stays as an idea of all the things that we don't want to shift in our life. And I want it to be kind of a hands-on inspiration and, opportunity to actually make a shift. So I have a copy here. It looks like this: Wisdom Beyond What You Know. And you'll find it on my website and anywhere where books are sold. But if you feel kind of, oh, I want more of this, I invite you to check it out.
I will. I usually have a book of the month, sometimes more than that. So that can become the book of the month for heart-centered awareness.
Oh, beautiful. Yes. I invite you to it has 7 shifts, inner shifts in the book, so that it's structured in a way that it's actually actionable and relatable. So it's not just an idea that is presented. So, and I invite you to check it out.
I will. And I will also include it as the book of the month. Can't wait to read it. Thank you. And thank you, Ulrika. I will definitely have you back. I believe you and I also got excited about talking about astrology and charts, and maybe I can share a little bit about what I've been learning. So that would be a good
Yes. Oh, I'd love to be part of that. It's because it links into what we talked about earlier about the opportunity now to expand our perception of who we are. And astrology is a great tool to actually make it real, make it, as humans, we want to kind of relate to something, right? And our multidimensional self is just craving this perspective. So yeah, I would be excited to talk with you about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll follow up with you. I am so honored that you were on the show today. You shared so much wisdom and a lot of practical things that I believe the cerebral part of our brain will say, okay, I have something to go work on now.
Yes, I'm happy to. This was such a lovely, beautiful conversation with you, Shilpa. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be in conversation with you, and I'm happy to come back.
I'm so honored to have you as my new friend. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you so much.